I noticed a video the other day that said something like, I maladaptive daydream, but I love it. Or, I love being a maladaptive daydreamer. And it's a little bit of a controversial point, because the whole concept of something being maladaptive is that it's not good for you, or that it's got negative implications in your life. So when you say you love something, that would kind of suggest it doesn't, therefore it's not maladaptive. But I think we have come to people who do maladaptive daydream, or people who daydream in a particular way that has been labelled as maladaptive daydreaming. I can understand how they might say they enjoy that. I think the interesting thing about maladaptive daydreaming is it is enjoyable until it causes you suffering. So I think the other term would be like immersive daydreaming. I know like people talk about that, but I do think when you look into maladaptive daydreaming and you see the way it's done and the way people speak about it, it can be something that you enjoy. And I really have to admit that I did used to enjoy it, and I even think back and have memories that are like real memories, and I was like, oh, I was so happy then. But like that time didn't really exist, but I'm always like, oh, that was such a happy time in my life when I was doing that particular daydreaming. And I think it does kind of make sense, because it does, our brain is daydreaming to take us away from a reality or from other thoughts that we don't want to have. So it does make sense, it's enjoyable to a certain extent. But then the problem becomes when it overtakes your life, when you can't stop it, when you can't control it, when the storylines become unpleasant, when, it starts to just have physical symptoms. I used to have this feeling where I would start maladaptive daydreaming about a particular fixation, and I would be like, oh, I love this. I would feel like so good. And I think it probably lined up with difficult points in my life where, I really needed to escape, and therefore I can understand why that felt good. But then, it would slowly merge into something that was almost sickening. And then I began to suffer. So it sort of, for me, it starts off as something good. I then want to do it too much. I can't sleep. I then can't get through the day. I feel like this nausea eating me up throughout the day because I'm doing it, because I'm not existing in the real world, and I've disassociated, I'm disconnected to everything that's going on around me, and that does create a split and a unpleasantness, like a physical unpleasantness. And then I used to always hate like waking up, and I would switch immediately into daydreams, and I couldn't. There were times where I just couldn't exist as myself, and I really badly wanted to. And that is where it's not enjoyable. So I think there is this, in, I guess, a like pain pleasure divide that you sometimes slip over. I think sometimes the way I think about it is like when you drink alcohol, like sometimes you have a very long time where that alcohol feels good and then it becomes a hangover. And sometimes you have times where almost immediately when you start drinking, you can feel the hangover through it. You can kind of feel like that hangover already coming. The drink doesn't give you that much pleasure anymore. It doesn't give you pleasure for very long before it becomes that hangover. I think like for me, like that's the way I've always kind of thought about it. But I think something that's interesting that's I've noticed happening online with like younger people, or what I've heard, because I don't have TikTok, but I've heard that young people are like filming themselves maladaptive daydreaming and talking about it. And I saw a video telling people don't romanticize maladaptive daydreaming, and I think that is more complicated than it seems, because why are things difficult? Why is the way we think difficult? Sometimes it is because no one relates to us. And particularly for me, maladaptive daydreaming has been such a secret and such a difficult thing that I've been dealing with in complete isolation. I'm now, I'm thinking back to when I was younger, say I was at university. If I had known other people who maladaptive daydreamed, if, for instance, the casual conversation was like, what did you daydream about last night, instead of like, what did you watch last night? Of course, that would make maladaptive daydreaming more enjoyable, or more, I can understand why you would be romanticizing in that way, or you would be saying, oh, I actually enjoy this, because you've got a connection there. I think, a lot of mental health problems are caused by isolation, and just in terms of what's acceptable. I mean, I used to love running up and down my room and daydreaming, but it got to the point where I knew that was not what other people did, and that was not socially acceptable, and I had then a lot of shame around it. So if I hadn't had that shame, and I was actually a young person now who, felt comfortable filming myself, which, I can't imagine, because that used to be my biggest fear. I felt comfortable filming myself, and say I had friends who maladaptive daydreamed and filming themselves. Obviously, daydreaming wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't have the same negative impact. So I think when people tell other people, don't romanticize this, I think, if you are lucky enough to have a positive experience of doing something that for most other people is negative because of the context, and kind of fair enough. It was interesting as well, I saw on the Reddit board for maladaptive daydreaming, one of the rules is do not romanticize maladaptive daydreaming. And then I saw a comment where somebody came on and said, oh, when I found out about this, I thought I'd come to this board and we'd all be talking about how cool it was to be able to daydream like this, and we'd be talking about how, what an amazing skill this is. And the person then was saying, but I've come here and I didn't realise everybody was trying to stop doing this, and everybody was depressed about it, and everybody was struggling, and it was torturing them. And it was just so fascinating to me, the different perspectives on this, in terms of, how you look at it, and in terms of, the life. I think, a lot of the pain comes just, from the conflict of what you're doing. And this is why, I always thought, oh, maybe I just want to be an actress, and then my desire to act out, my desire to, be other people would be put somewhere. But actuality, to be an actress, you need to be very present, and actually you need to face yourself in ways that you wouldn't just in normal life. So can I realise, no, that isn't where I'm always looking for some kind of harmony in my life between the external and the internal, because I've never had that. And what I think is, for these younger people, if what we would consider maladaptive daydreaming, if for them that is actually something that they can put out there, and social media, I suppose, and the internet is letting us put out there and talk about things and do things that we've never done before. So, I was absolutely terrified of being caught maladaptive daydreaming, that I had to force myself to stop the physical aspect of it, and I fell into a deep depression. And these younger people who actually feel comfortable enough to film themselves and put it on TikTok, and then I guess talk to other people who are probably filming themselves and put it on TikTok, I don't think we should say to people, oh, don't do that because, other people are suffering. I mean, it makes sense how I've suffered. I've never known anybody my whole life with maladaptive daydreaming. I've never been able to speak about it. I've felt so much shame about it. And it's this shame that's really the difficult thing. So if you don't have shame, I suppose it's just always a lot of things. It's not what you do, it's the way that you do. I think that's a song. I've just been thinking about this because, I think people don't seem to like other people saying something positive about maladaptive daydreaming, even though it's the same thing, it's the same symptoms. So the word maladaptive obviously is negative. So I think, when people are enjoying daydreaming, I think there's a push to kind of name that something else, just call that immersive daydreaming. But if you're kind of doing the same thing as we would see with people with maladaptive daydream, you can understand why that term maladaptive daydream has been coined for those particular symptoms and that particular way that we do daydream. But yeah, I think there really is like this, I think, you know, like alcohol, there really is this thin line between enjoying it and suffering from it. And the fact of the matter is it's addictive, and I guess it depends on the reasons you're doing it. When something's addictive and you feel you've got no control over it, you feel you can't stop, that's when it becomes scary, and you start to recognise it's eating up all your time, that you're not existing as yourself. That is when, you know, a discomfort begins. So when I started daydreaming, you know, I saw it in the same way as this person who came to the Reddit board. It was like, oh wow, like what a gift I've got. Like I have such an imagination. I can sort of slip into being other people, really, and I can kind of live out their whole lives in my head. I thought, you know, well, this is so cool. You know, I really did love it. And then obviously I began to realise, no, wait a minute, this is not this is not what other people would do. This is not healthy. It's not something I can talk about. It's taking up all my time. And then, you know, when you're younger and you know, you're living at your parents' house, and you know, that's the house where you've grown up and you've played and you've had your imagination there. So it kind of although you're running with that imagination, I guess, longer than other people are growing up, you're still, you know, in your childhood bedroom, etc. So it still almost makes sense. But then once you leave that place, like for me when I went to university, that's when I realised, like, oh my god, like I need to stop this. And it was such a struggle. It was like so painful to stop. And that's where it's like, you know, I want to maladaptive daydream because it stops the pain, but I don't want to maladaptive daydream because it's causing the pain. And I don't know, I have OCD, so I don't know if this is exactly how other people feel about maladaptive daydreaming. And I think, you know, I've been, you know, putting myself out here talking about maladaptive daydreaming. I've got interesting comments from people, and I'm, you know, always interested in what people's experience with this has been, and you know, how they feel in terms of like that enjoyment and suffering divide. I mean, I think that is the tricky thing. You know, things are hard to stop because there is something pleasurable about them, like whether it's actually just putting your brain at ease, like it is a physiological thing, or whether you're conscious of this being an enjoyable thing up to a certain point. This is why it's a hard thing to actually get help for, because you don't know if you really want the help. You don't know if you really want to stop. And there is, you know, certain times in my life I just would not have wanted to stop. So you really do need to like kind of reach a breaking point with it. And I feel, you know, that is the place I can see, you know, a lot of people in my comments are kind of getting to. But I think it's fascinating. Just that, you know, younger people are getting answers to their problems quicker. So, you know, a teenager now, once they realise they've got an addiction to daydreaming, will type that in to the internet and they'll have their answer. The internet wasn't around in that way when I was younger, and it still, you know, wasn't really used to like diagnose yourself with problems. So, you know, almost unbelievably, I never actually googled this until, you know, 5 or 6 years ago. But you know, now the way our brains are, the way the internet is, I know young people now, you know, if you've got a problem, you ask the internet. You know that somebody out there is going to have the same problem. And I think, you know, that's another reason why that eases the pain of maladaptive daydreaming, and perhaps, you know, makes it an easier thing to deal with, because you're probably aware very early on that it's something other people do. Whereas, you know, for older people like me, we've had to spend a long time in the dark, like not knowing that anybody else did this. So yeah, the enjoyment suffering divide is really quite a tricky one. But yeah, I'd love to hear how you feel about this in terms of, you know, do you enjoy maladaptive daydreaming so much that you couldn't stop? Or, you know, is it really causing suffering in your life. You might even like seesaw between those feelings, and that is what makes it difficult to get help, or to feel like you even want the help. So yeah, please do leave a comment and let me know, and please do like and subscribe if you can, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.